The Spanish Civil War is a conflict that is very interesting for a variety of historical reasons, and yet it hasn't received a lot of attention from war game designers, maybe because it was overshadowed by World War II. So it is kind of surprising that in the past couple of months, not one but two war games came out about the Spanish Civil War. One is by GMT and is called, clearly enough, the Spanish Civil War. The other one is by Numbskull Games and it is Popular Front. Today we're going to talk about Popular Front, and in another video review we'll be talking about GMT's The Spanish Civil War. What you find in the box is a map, a mounted map by the way, which looks pretty nice and is 100% functional, it works very well. Then you have 6 bags of wooden discs in different shadows of red, pink and blue, which can be used to play the game with 2 players. In that case you just use all the shades of one color, or all the way up to 6 players. In that case you just give each player a different shade. Then you have this large deck here, which has actually 6 identical decks, again, one for each player if you're playing with 6 players. And then you have a rule book, which is very short, a lot of examples, and I found it pretty well written. At the beginning of the game, players will alternate placing their units on the board, on these spaces here, which represent cities, and they will keep doing so until every space on the board is taken. Now, there is no reason why one player wouldn't take one entire area of the board and the other player would take that one. There is no rule against it. However, I haven't seen that happening. Most likely, players will try to run for the most valuable areas, and then they will try to place your units in such a way that they will try to encircle the other player's units and try to cut the lines of supplies and communication. So most likely the game at the beginning will look something like this, with very intricate situations where it's kind of unclear who is surrounding whom in many areas. The advantage, of course, is that you have great variability. Different games will play in different ways if you just have a different setup, and the setup is not dull or just perfunctory. It is already part of the game. On the other hand, of course, this doesn't give you much of an historical feel because the units might end up being in locations where they were not historically, and that might be seen as a drawback by some players. One way of winning the game is by taking control of the 6 key cities on the map, and that way is by using the political economic track, which you see here. In the middle of the track you have the political marker, which the players will move back and forth by using political actions, and I'll explain later what those are. The other way that the track is used is by moving your economic markers when you take control of enemy cities. Each time you take control of an enemy city, you move that marker by the number written on the city. In this case, suppose that the Republicans take control of those 3 cities, then they can move like this, the economic marker. Suppose that later the nationalists regain control of those 3 cities, then it is their marker that moves by 3, because the economic markers never go back. In any case, you will keep moving this marker back and forth and trying to advance your economic markers, and one way of winning the game is if you can put your economic marker past the political marker. This is a card-driven game, and a seriously card-driven. In fact, there are no dice. Cards are used to perform every action in the game. Each player will have an identical deck of 20 cards, and cards have a numerical value, as you can see there. And of course they have special actions that fall into 3 categories: muster, political and military. So cards will be played either for the numerical value or for their special action. One of the things you can do with your cards is to commit them for political action. And it's pretty simple. The players will just place cards there in those boxes for political action, which means they're committing them there and they cannot use them for anything else. So it's sort of like continuous drain on your resources that you would want to use for military action. At the end of the turn, players will reveal their cards, and the player who has committed the highest number there will win the political struggle for that turn. However, certain cards will have special political effects, like this one usually is a 1, but if played for political, you treat this card as 4. In this case, the Republicans win the political struggle for that turn, and the political marker will move one space toward their economic marker. So that's the way you move that marker. Another thing that you can do with your cards is to muster. In that case, you play the cards on the table and you get the number of muster actions equal to the value of the card that you play. Here you would have 2 points of muster, 4, or if you play this one, has a special effect. In this case, it's used for muster, you would treat this as 4 instead of 1. It would be 1, for example, if you play for political or military. Then the way you spend those points is each point allows you to bring on the board a new unit. So in this case it would be 1 point, 2 points, or it allows you to move a unit from one city to an adjacent one. In this case I spent 2 extra points, so I moved these 2 extra units there. And if you're wondering, well, why didn't you spend points just to place units there, so you spend only 2 instead of 4? Well, it is because there's a tricky rule about placing new units on the board. You can do that, in fact, only in friendly cities that are connected to more friendly cities than they are to enemy cities. For example, this city here is adjacent to 2 enemy cities and is adjacent to only 2 friendly cities. So 2 is no more than enemy. I cannot add new units there. I could bring people in that city instead, because this city is connected to 1 friendly and 0 enemies, or to this one, which is what I did, because this city is adjacent to 2 friendly cities and only to 1 enemy city. And then, of course, you have battles. The battle action starts when you declare an attack, and the first thing that you do is you count the initial forces of the attacking and the defending city. Suppose we have this city that is attacking that other one, then we have 3 units here versus 1. Again, that 3 is the initial strength of the attacker, 1 of the defender. If the attacker is attacking across a river, for example, if he's attacking here, then the defender gets an extra defense point. So it would be 3 versus 2 in this case. Next, the attacking player will place a card down to start forming his reserves, and the defender might just decide not to respond to that, to give up the city. In this case, the attacker wins the battle, or to respond by playing another card to start forming reserves too. At that point, the attacking player gets a chance of playing another one, and you go back and forth like this. You can add cards to your reserves until one of the 2 players passes. In that case, the reserve phase is over and the battle starts by using the cards that you committed to your reserves. The way it works is that starting with the defender, the players will flip 1 card at a time and they will deploy it, and the definition of deploy card and reserves is pretty important. And then if the card has a military action, then you can execute that action, otherwise the card just stays there for the numerical value. In this case, for example, the defender played this card, eliminate 1 deployed enemy cards, but the enemy doesn't have any, so nothing happens. Then the attacker plays this other card, says eliminate 1 deployed enemy cards of the opponent's choice, but there's only 1, so the opponent has to eliminate this one. We flip this one. Partisan eliminate 1 card from the enemy reserves of the opponent's choice. In this case, the opponent will go through their reserves and say, I'll get rid of this one. And then you keep flipping and executing those actions. This is a powerful one. Look at the enemy reserves and choose the one that you want to destroy. In this case, it will destroy this one because it's very powerful. This card, for example, if it's deployed, cannot be destroyed. So you can see different cards have very different effects that can go against the deployed units or the reserves. But it's a fast-moving battle system. In the end, when all cards have been flipped, have been deployed, and some of these have been eliminated, you add up the number values of the survivors. In this case, it would be 7 and 7 here, but then you add to these numbers the number that you calculated at the beginning, the number of units in your city, plus 1 for the defender if the attack was across a river. At that point, the person with the highest battle value is the winner. In case of a tie, the defender wins. Overall, I really like this game. I like how the card deck has a luck factor that is balanced by the distribution of the cards. If you got all the good cards at the beginning, then the cards that are less useful are still in the deck, and the other way around. So it's different that if you're rolling dice, and it might happen that you always get low numbers or high numbers. I like the combat system because there's still strategies you can do, even though it's pretty straightforward. There is a bluffing factor to it. You have to remember what your opponent played in previous turns and trying to figure out what he's gonna play now. So it's pretty intriguing. It's interesting. Also, you have to make sure that you do not deplete your hand launching an attack or defending against one. So sometimes you'll have to take a calculated risk and lose a city so you can act somewhere else powerfully in the next turn. So there are a lot of things to it. The thing I like the most probably is how the units of both sides are spread around the board everywhere in the area. It really gives you the sense of a conflict that's going on so many different fronts. Certain areas where you're trying to encircle your opponents, other areas where you're particularly weak and you're trying to mount a desperate defense. It just is a level of complexity to this. It's a very intricate conflict, and very often you won't be able to do all that you want. Again, calculate the risks that if you act with a powerful attack in one area, then you're leaving another one unguarded. But it's really interesting. Very often you're very proud of yourself because of a good action that you managed to create, and then you realize that you left a huge opportunity open for your opponent to exploit. So it's fun. I like the political system, how it creates a burden over the military resources that you can spend to do your other actions. So again, just a matter of balance you need to create and hand management. There are two things that I think maybe people will not like about this. One is that the game does not have a strong sense of historical feel. Just because the units are so abstract, they're all the same, and you can set them up any way you want, not necessarily the way they were historically. So if people are looking for a game with a strong historical feel, this might not be the right one. The other thing is that in a two-player game, players might get sometimes stuck trying to take the same city back and forth for one another. They can concentrate on the same area just stubbornly. In this case, the game becomes repetitive, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's no rule that says that you have to play that way if you play taking into account the entire scenario of the war, all the fronts and all the areas. Then not only is it more fun, but actually you probably have better chances of playing effectively and developing effective strategies. So if you think that you'll be able to do that, that's the spirit that you're approaching the game in, then I think this can be a very fun game.